Okay, you guys are live and the meeting is yours whenever you'd like to start.
Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order at 7 o'clock for the White Lake Township Parks and Recreation Committee, January 13th. Can I have some help with the roll call, either Justin or Sherry?
I can take care of the roll call.
Thank you.
All right. So in my last meeting, our township attorney asked that you state where you're calling from.
Yes.
So after I call your name, if you could state where you're calling in from.
Just like the city or township.
Voorhees.
From White Lake Township, present.
Asseltine.
Here, White Lake Township.
Carlock.
Here, White Lake Township.
Deeren.
Here, White Lake Township.
Brada.
Here, White Lake Township.
Grubbs.
Here, White Lake Township.
Okay. So the next thing is the Pledge of Allegiance. Jacob, are you able to give us a flag on our screens? Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag
The flag
Of the United
of the
States
United
of
States
America
of America,
and to the
to the
republic
republic
for which it
for which it
stands,
which it
stands,
stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under God,
under God,
under God,
indivisible, with
indivisible,
liberty and justice for
liberty
all.
and justice for all.
Thank you. So that's always fun because there's some kind of time delay in there. All right, we have the approval of the agenda is next on our list. Are there any changes or adjustments to the agenda? Anyone? Justin? Can we have a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Support.
Support by Rhonda. All in favor? Aye.
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 Don't we have
we
to do a roll
talked-
call for that? Sorry.
Well, what they said at the last meeting I was at was that it's for substantive vote, so that agendas and minutes, we can just say aye.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying.
Until somebody tells us otherwise.
Yes, exactly.
Item number 4, approval of the minutes, which we were sent earlier from December 9th. Are there any corrections or changes to those minutes? Okay, I have can I have a motion to approve the minutes as submitted?
Motion to submit the minutes as is.
Who
Support.
was-
Support?
Okay. Was that Kathleen?
Doesn't matter, CJ, either one.
No, it's support for Kathleen's motion.
Oh,
Yeah, that's what I thought. Kathleen and CJ. Okay, thank you. And all in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? I guess I should ask for opposed. Now, we have item number 5 is a call to the public for items not on the agenda. Jacob, are there anybody in our waiting room?
Yeah, we have a couple. So if you are calling in, it is *9 to raise your hand if you'd like to speak on anything that's not being brought up. And we'll give it a minute to see.
And just a real quick, I think we removed that other items not on the agenda at call to the public. So if anyone calls in, they can talk on whatever they want.
Oh, okay. Because
Sorry.
sometimes we have an item later, but we don't have a public forum for that. So,
Yeah, sorry.
so if they wanted to talk about Stanley Park, that'd be fine.
Well, I have no one raising their hand, so I think you guys are good to move on.
All right. The next item is the new business for the Beckett and Rader presentation for the concepts for Stanley Park. So I will turn it over to Justin now.
Thanks, Mary. We have Brian Barrick and Caitlin Jackson from Beckett and Rader, and they've been working hard since our last meeting to get to this point to prepare a recommended final design, and they put together some conceptual costs for us to review tonight. So I don't want to steal their thunder. So without further ado, I'll let Brian take the floor.
Thank you, Justin, and thank you everyone for your time. We've been very busy since our last meeting, and have some things to show you tonight. Some new ideas and considerations, and just to set a little bit of expectation, we'll take a look at some of the discussion we had at our last meeting. Recap that a little bit before moving on to a concept review, and then talking a little bit about costs. We did some estimating for the park and have grouped together some potential ideas for a first phase. So we'll take a look at that together and gather your thoughts on that, and then talk a little bit about next steps. So, and by the way, I'm happy to keep this informal. If you have any thoughts along the way, feel free to interject. So this is a slide excerpt from our last presentation at the last meeting. As you might recall, we had a couple different options that were pretty similar, except for the north end of the park, and that was related mainly to the amphitheater size and capacity. Overall, everybody seemed pretty content with the conceptual design as it was presented. Everybody agreed with keeping the character of furnishings and structures consistent with Bloomer Park, and maintaining a little bit of identity across the township park system. The majority of the committee members favored a larger capacity amphitheater, but at the same time, I think we all recognize that that's going to be a much later phase in the park development. There's a lot to be still discussed and figured out in terms of the amphitheater. So really what we're showing at this point is more or less a placeholder. There was some mixed opinions on use of porous pavements, or which type of porous pavement. So when we get into the cost estimating discussion later, we've used some cost figures that would accommodate a variety of different options, just so that we have some dollars allocated for that. General consensus was that the park would include a hierarchy of trails, both in width and materials, and that the path should include a plentiful amount of benches. We also had some discussion about other amenities. One was a dog park, and just wanted to mention that we did do a little bit of research on the closest dog park available, and there is one at Pontiac Lake State Park, or excuse me, State Recreation Area, which is about 4.5 miles from Stanley Park. Currently has a 1.4 acre off-leash area, which is divided into a small dog area and a large dog area. Disc golf, I think we talked about that a little bit in the meeting, and everybody, I think, was on the same page that the Stanley Park really isn't suited for a full-size disc golf course, just due to the property size and the amount of acreage that's occupied by wetlands on the property. And pickleball, I think there was, again, general consensus that might occur better at an active sports park. The idea of Hidden Pines Park was raised with the ball field over there, and that pickleball courts might be a nice addition to that park as well. So again, just the recognition that we did hear you on these topics, and have responded with those understandings. So moving on to to an updated concept for tonight. You can see we've taken the next step in our graphics and have put some of these ideas into the computer with some hardline drawings and renderings, and include these general concepts here with a connection to the future Township Civic Center, both pedestrian and vehicular, accommodating, as I mentioned, a placeholder for a future amphitheater that is the scope of which is really to be determined. We have a hierarchy of trails throughout the park, both in material and width, with the trails towards the center of the core here being either concrete or asphalt trails leading from the waterfront all the way through the park and up through to the future Civic Center. And then boardwalks and limestone fines trails in some of the more natural, undeveloped portions of the park. Picnic sheltered facilities throughout, and fishing pier and canoe kayak launch and a beach along the waterfront. Again, all of this designed with the mindset of preserving the existing natural features as much as possible, and designing as lightly on the land as possible with sustainable stormwater management so that we have that water quality protection for both for the wetlands that are on site as well as for Brindle Lake. So just zooming in and taking a little closer look, again, the placeholder for the amphitheater to be determined. Entry roadway coming in off of Elizabeth Lake Road and curving around down to the lower portion of the park, sloping significantly as it goes. I should mention that we're still working through some of the technical aspects of this entry roadway and the connection to the future Civic Center site. So some of the geometry of the roadway in this area may continue to evolve a little bit, but we feel that we have sufficient cost covered in the estimate, whether it be this geometry or a modified geometry. So just an awareness for that. Moving a little further south, the roadway comes down. Oops, actually, let me go back to this for a moment. We're planning on this entry roadway having curb and gutter and traditional asphalt, bituminous pavements along it with concrete sidewalk. And then as we get a little bit further south, you can see the change in color in the rendering here. At this point, we would look to transition from the traditional bituminous pavement and curb and gutter to a porous pavement system, whether that be porous asphalt, porous concrete, permeable pavers, or simply gravel. Those are all options available. You can see some indications for bioswales and stormwater management off to the side of the roadway. There's a series of little tiny dots that you can see along here that would be wooden bollards or wooden guardrail just to serve as a barrier between the vehicular roadway and the green space areas. Our first parking area and trailhead as we head south into the park, combined with a picnic shelter facility here. Interspersed along the trails in various locations, you'll see benches and a few interpretive signs. Moving further south to the core portion of the park, the porous roadway, permeable roadway continues down into a cul-de-sac turnaround, which has shifted just a little bit further west from what you've previously seen. And we've also added a drop-off connection on the sort of the northwest side of that turnaround, so that there's an opportunity for vehicles to pull up, unload passengers or kayaks, and directly access the path coming down to the lakefront. Pathways in the central core, you can see the lighter color is planned as concrete, and then transitioning to bituminous pavements in this darker color. A primary restroom and shelter building in the center area with playground, and then two smaller shelters off to the side. Also preserving the option for this to possibly be a small maintenance building in lieu of a picnic shelter, should that be desired. At the lakefront, again, a small picnic shelter, an observation shelter, along with observation pier, and then pathways over to an accessible kayak and canoe launch. And then you can also see hints of bioswales and stormwater management along the edge of the roadway, again, along with the timber bollards or guardrail for vehicular control. Northwest of that central core, we have a natural trail loop, which would be crushed limestone fines, and then having boardwalks where we cross the wetland areas. And then likewise on the southeast, additional more natural trail loops in crushed limestone fines, and again, boardwalks where they pass through the wetland areas. So from here, we'd like to transition into a discussion of costs, and then thinking a little bit about building a phasing plan for grant applications. As we think about building those phases, we've developed a menu of options that can be selected from to package together a first phase project. As we package those items together, we want to be conscious of what elements are fundable by the grant, what elements may most greatly contribute to a good application score, and then also thinking about quality of design, basically a logical assembly of elements that make the park desirable and usable by the public, and all doing so in a budget that's reasonable within the township's funding structure. With all that in mind, this is a listing of those menu options that I talked about, along with a graphic with shading of how those different menu options are physically located on the site. Overall, we have a total hard cost estimate of a little over $4 million, plus about $900,000 in soft cost, for a project total of the entire park of just a shade over $5 million. Just to define some of that terminology a little bit, hard costs are what we consider to be what a contractor's actual bid would be for constructing the project. So it would include all the materials, the labor, the physical construction, along with a small amount of construction contingency. Soft costs are costs that would be borne by the township that are outside of the contractor's bid, meaning things like design fees, inspection fees, permits, their township contingency, geotechnical services, those types of items. So when we add those things together, the total cost to the township would be that combined hard and soft cost of a little over $5 million. Does that explanation make sense to everybody? Okay.
Yes, for me.
All right, thank you. I see head shaking, so thank you. So with all this in mind, I'd also like to mention that some of these costs may appear high for what they are, but keep in mind that these are what I'll call all-in costs. So for example, if I just use a bench as an example, it's not only the cost of the bench itself, but it's the cost of the labor to install the bench. It's the cost of the excavation to install it, the concrete footings, the concrete apron underneath the bench. So in other words, that it's a whole package or a whole assembly of items that makes that one complete functional amenity. So that sometimes that translates into a cost that's seemingly higher than what you would think it might be on the surface. So from there, we've taken a shot at putting together some possible first phase options for you to consider. These are just initial thoughts. We want to hear what you think of these options, and then we're happy to tweak and adjust and push and pull these lines to get to where everybody would like to be. So as a first option, we're just calling it option A, would be to install the entry road down to where the first bay of parking is designed, and then also include the sort of trailhead and picnic area in that first lower park location. So essentially encompassed by the dashed line and red shading would be installed in this option A. The total project hard and soft cost represented by that is just a little under $800,000. Now, the Michigan Natural Resources Trust Fund grant has a maximum allowable grant value, at least in 2021, funding cycle of $300,000. So if we assume that we'll get awarded a $300,000 grant, then the actual cost to the township would be that roughly $800,000 less the $300,000 grant. So more or less $500,000. Another option we put together is to do that same road down to the first parking area, include that same trailhead and picnic shelter area, but then also install the asphalt pathway down all the way to the lake shore, and then also include the waterfront recreation amenities at the lake. We feel including those amenities at the lake is very beneficial to grant scoring and the way that the trust fund would look at the grant application. And Mary, feel free to chime in as we go here. I know you have special knowledge about that.
Well, yeah, that definitely would give you natural resources points that you might not get at the other thing. If we just did the trailhead and the road to the trailhead there. And of course, people are going to be very interested in getting down to the water. I feel a little bad, for, as we talked before, how far that is for persons, with disabilities or mobility issues. I do want to, so I just had a question while I'm talking, is that the trailhead area is called a trailhead because of a trail that's going to go from that location down to the beach, like in this concept, or what trail is it a trailhead for? I guess I missed that somewhere along the way.
Yeah, it may be a little bit of poor terminology on our part, but we've been referring to this area as a trailhead and picnic area simply because that is the first opportunity for parking as you come into the park.
If we had trails along Elizabeth
Opportunity
Lake
for
Road,
somebody to park, exit their vehicle, and enter the trail system.
the trail system in the park or the trail system along Elizabeth Lake Road? That's proposed.
In the park. Yeah, in the park.
Okay, so I guess is there a trail that's along the roadway that we're calling? I guess I don't know where, I see the trails loops, and I don't see exactly a trail there, but maybe it's just a picnic area and we'll connect to other things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So as I mentioned in this concept, we have been installing the roadway, that picnic area, and then the trail all the way down to the lakefront. The total cost for that is just a little bit under 1.3 million, less the $300,000 trust fund grant. So total cost from the township would be a little bit under $1 million.
We might want to consider a land and water application, although that's a little more stringent. And right now, all the land and water grants are kind of held up for unknown reasons, but that it's gone to a $500,000 grant in 21. But that requires equal match. So if you ask for 500, you would also have to put up 500, but that's a couple $100,000 more than the trust fund grant. Trust fund, because proposal A passed in November, they may consider going back to 500, which was an older grant amount, which is better because it's 75-25, but that wouldn't be for 21. It's possible for 22.
Yeah. Another option for first phasing, it creeps the budget up a little more, but it also provides some more amenities in a first phase. So in this option, we would be adding the central core area, the walkways, and the picnic, and the shelters, and the shelter in this area. It would exclude the primary restroom and picnic shelter, and also exclude the playground, to have a budget just a little under $2 million. I did note here, though, that if we wanted to add the playground back into it, it would add about $150,000 to that number. The next option, D, has roughly the same dollar value, but essentially, sorry, let me go back to this one for a moment. So in this one, we would also be bringing the roadway down further to this parking area right here, but not extending it for the full length all the way to the drop-off loop. So the roadway would come in, come around, and then stop at this parking area here, so that there is parking and access to this central core area. this next option, as I started to say, has virtually the same dollar value, but we flopped some of the improvements in order to achieve completing the full roadway all the way down to the drop-off loop, and then also including the shelter over on the southeast side, but not including the waterfront improvements. So again, just a little bit of give and take between these two options. But we just wanted to show you how some of those amenities might be able to flip-flop around in order to achieve virtually the same dollar value. So I'll pause here for a moment and flip back to this diagram. And I'd just like to gather everybody's thoughts on priorities for our first phase, and if you have any reactions to the menu of options or these four concepts that we've initially roughed together. And Justin, maybe you want to give a brief introduction to budget thoughts.
Sure. So where we're at now, the estimated, the accounting department is still finalizing the December report, but as of now, the fund balance, the parks fund balance, is approximately $215,000, with the millage collection for this year. That's at about estimated to be about $356,000. So that would put the parks fund at $570,000. So, we have an annual maintenance cost of, I'll say 50,000 to be safe. And in 2020, it was like 42,000. So, and that's just grounds maintenance. And then we have some insurance costs and electric, some utilities if we turn on the lights at the pavilions. So in the meeting packet, I sent the 2021 parks budget that is somewhat inaccurate based on the 2020 fund balance. But that just gives you an idea of what it takes to just keep the parks running in terms of maintenance.
So this grant, if it goes in 2021, it would not be, it would be recommended by December or not. And then the actual time that you might start spending funds would start January 22 for your design and preparing of contract documents. So, and construction would depend on, usually and very frequently, it's not in that first year, but it can be if you have prepared your plans and specs before the project agreements come out. That actually takes another 6 more months, because the way the statute is written, every time the board makes a recommended list, it has to be turned into legislation that's passed by both the state house and Senate and signed into law by the governor. And this year, for example, we were able, or the project agreements were issued in August. So there's quite a bit of a delay after you find out the hopefully good news before you could move forward. So anyway, at the very least, you would also have funds from 2021 added to that. And did you have an estimate of what an annual assessment would be, Justin? Like, I know you said they haven't figured out.
The millage collection?
Yeah, is that for a calendar year?
Yeah, it's approximately $350,000
per year. So
per year. Yeah.
So before you would need this, obviously we're paying for our consultant here. It would be at least 1, if not 2 more years. So just speaking from how the timeline, these are not for people in a hurry because there's lots of stops along the way. So, I mean, the good news is you'd have more money in your reserves. Have you, Justin, before we go around to everybody, have you talked to, I mean, we know how much might be available, but what's the feeling around Township Hall, the supervisor, the treasurer? I certainly don't want to see our fund balance go very low. I mean,
Sure.
we need to keep a fund balance.
I mean, I would say the parks fund balance, we would like, 300,000 would be ideal to maintain in there.
Yeah.
I think that the Parks Committee should not expect large contributions from the general fund
No.
for Stanley Park. The only small contribution we may receive is for the driveway that runs adjacent to the Civic Center site. But I wouldn't, use that as we factor in calculations. I know it's dollars and cents. And what is the reality? Well, the reality is that in 2021, the fund balance is going to be $570,000. And let's just say through maintenance, paying consultants, staff time, the insurance. I mean, we're going to spend at least $100,000. Just throw that out there in 2021 this year. So that would put us at 470. If we really buckle down and try to save, and then if we get, so that's, if we do, that's just where we're at.
Yeah. And then you'd have another 300.
And then another 350 in 2022.
From 2021.
Yeah.
By the time you think about, starting design.
Yeah. So it's just, we don't have to maintain a $300,000 fund balance. Maybe, the township would be comfortable at 200,000. But that's
but
just
nothing below that.
Nothing below that. Nothing below that.
Yeah.
But I know that the township supervisor did look at this and is generally supportive of the design. His comments were that if the old cement, his initial comments, he just looked at this briefly. If the old cement building is eliminated, then we need to have a separate maintenance building somewhere else on the property. And he had some good reasons for that. His other comment was the driveway from Elizabeth Lake Road needs to be shifted so it's directly adjacent to the Civic Center property. And I think that is consistent with what the CCDC, the Civic Center Development Committee, has been planning. I know it may be more expensive to move the driveway over there because of the grade and some potential retaining walls and things like that. But just to be harmonious with the Civic Center, that probably is going to happen. Overall, as we look at this list of 18 items on the left side of the screen, for example, item number 17, wetland path loop B, that's 613,000. That's probably going to be a much later phase. Or if you look at the northern wetland path loop number 15, that's 340. If we remove the northern third of that and still have a loop, but take off that just make the loop smaller, that might shave a third of the cost off of that. So it's
right. Maybe we don't need the 3 legs.
So I think the idea is that this design is great. What Beck and Rader has done would be like in an ideal world, if we had $10 million in the Parks Fund, we would build this. But the township with the Civic Center and this park, the limited dollars are being pulled in a lot of different directions. And so we're going to have to really prioritize. And, if we look at some of these numbers, like the number 9, the restroom and shelter building, we may need to scale back on what we're envisioning down there.
Yeah, I mean, you could do the restrooms as a separate building later. Use porta-johns for a couple of years. You could do gravel. I don't know that everything has to be, well, I will say that gravel pavement is not considered pervious for environmental points in the trust fund, but the other systems are, but maybe that's just the parking bays that get those and the rest of the water handled through the rain gardens. I think that would still get the same credit.
Maybe immediately we just like pave from Elizabeth Lake Road down the hill. And then if we're going to do anything further, it'd be,
Right. It could
crushed
be
limestone
gravel.
or gravel.
Yeah, for now. And then you
for
can
now,
always come
anyway.
back and pave it later.
I think the idea is that this plan, based on the numbers that we're seeing and, what the township ultimately wants to achieve here, this is probably a 10-year plan. And, we need to, as we're prioritizing, phases for grant applications, we should probably, and I would defer to Mary because she is, has some expertise on this, but we probably want to create 3 solid grant applications, one for 2021, 22, and 23. And so we want to, as we look at this list of 18 items on the left, is there anything that we can scale back, or what do we want to include in each one of those 3 so we have a solid shot? We don't want one A+ application in 2021 and then some not so stellar applications in the coming years. So correct me if I'm wrong, Mary, but I think maybe that's the strategy tonight is one. I think there's 2 parts to this. One, tonight, I think the goal for the Parks Committee is to make a recommendation on the design. 2 would be to let's prioritize this list. Let's come up with a solid phase 1 and make sure that the remaining items for phase 2 and phase 3 will also create an acceptable fund-worthy application.
Yeah, and actually it takes quite a while for these things to, I mean, you might want to do every other year instead of every year. Because I have some communities that they pile up and they can't get number 1 done, and they, it just kind of creates a problem when they're working on the same park. And my only last thing before we go around to everybody would be if there's still a way to save the cement block building, which I think is being lost from the road alignment, perhaps, or I still think it has merit to keep that as part of whatever project, as opposed to doing some other maintenance building elsewhere.
Mary, could I make one more comment before it goes around?
Of course.
I know the township board and the Parks Committee in the past have considered the Township Triangle Trail, and just briefly to describe it, it's M59 to the north, Highland Road, bounded by Elizabeth Lake and Teggerdine. They form a 2-mile loop, the Township Triangle, and there's about 1 mile of pathway currently constructed from previous development, private commercial development. There's about a mile left to construct. We had last summer considered an estimate from DLZ to design that, and that was for the remaining 1 mile to complete the loop, and that was $100,000. And then the construction cost estimate was $560,000. And I know in the past that trail has been a high priority because when the millage was passed, the Parks millage, people were told there's going to be trails and pathways in the township. Yeah. So, but we also have Stanley Park, which is working, there's a synergy between that and the Civic Center site. So I think we have to prioritize that, maybe the Township Triangle is going to be built in phases and it may take more time. But we really need to prioritize, because if we construct the Triangle Trail, we're going to wipe out the Parks Fund.
Oh yeah, you'd have to have another grant for that.
Yeah.
So, and that's, that's possible too, but yep, we have limited dollars. I can only see CJ on my screen on the side. So CJ, I'm going to ask you to ask for your comments.
Sure, I agree. I echo your concerns with the cement building on site, as well as also the large mature trees that were in the original packet that we got about a year ago about the site plan. And like really what I'm seeing from Brian, I really think he nailed it, and Beckett Rader understood exactly what we're going for, the design plan. And my concern is just like Justin's. I'm concerned, for budget, for everything. I see, in a perfect world, I'd like to get, everything done. But, I'm kind of seeing maybe we could do something in the lines of, to get points for the grant funding, maybe doing like one element from the lake at each part during the phase, if we want to go that route to get the 50-50 match, or if Mary, if you think we should go more for the 75-25 application and kind of leave off some of the lakefront items for a later date. I wouldn't want to give the residents a park that they can't use. So I at least want to get some type of trail to get the people down to the water at a minimum. But keeping with the budget, maybe we could reduce some of the lakefront development costs from the 300,000 and just pick one item that we want to do. I wouldn't want to wipe out the whole fund for the parks. I think it's important to keep reserves. And as far as the Triangle Trail, maybe we can do that in a different section. But I think when the people voted for the millage, I remember that they wanted, more trails. And I think the township residents probably would be more on board with, after passing this millage, to actually see their money be spent at a park rather than just a trail on Elizabeth Lake or on Taggardine. They might see like they get more use out of the park. So maybe that's my comments on it, but I really think everything else is really looking good. And I like the idea as well to keep the stormwater runoff from going into the lake, whether with the rain garden or some swell areas, something like that, just to keep it all natural for the lakefront community. So I really like that.
Thank you. Is anybody, I can't see anybody, so just maybe either Justin, you could maybe call on people. I don't know if you
Sure.
can.
I can go. The closest person to me is
Mhm.
Rhonda, and then I'll just go around.
Okay, thank you.
I think as far as the park goes, I think it's important to start out having access to be able to get all the way to the water. I mean, you can walk down there now, but I think that's a big part. But I also think that it's really important that, like you said, the voters voted. I mean, we really pushed trails in that last millage. And I think that the voters will want to see that we're doing what we said we were going to do. Otherwise, the next time it comes around, they may not vote. They'll say, yeah, you told us that last time and we didn't see it. So that, money's always a concern. But I think as far as Stanley Park goes, the water would be the biggest thing. It doesn't have to be immaculate, but something to get people down there. Let's see if I had anything else. Yep. That's it.
Thank you.
So the next on my screen is Kathleen.
Okay, a lot to take in here. I guess I'll start with Justin. I concur that I don't know if I have the right terminology, but with Mary said, we want to make the optimal use of the funding of the grants and working it out in the 3 phases. I'm totally on board with that. Option B, I think, is my favorite because like Rhonda just said, people want trails, waterfront's important. And I think we could cut back a little bit on the progress of the Triangle Trail if we were to give people another, not to renege on our agreement with the voters and have trails. Just, in fact, I think they might like it more because I think of it more of like a concrete triangle trail as opposed to a more natural setting. So I think that might be more appealing to them. So let's see what else. Yeah, I think I would go for that with emphasis on the core pathways and the waterfront recreation.
Okay, thank you, Kathleen.
Next on my screen is Andrea.
Very good, thank you. I actually, yeah, I like the plan myself also. I love the 3 different plan phase. I would love to say realistically that $5 billion we have, but let's be realistic. There's no other options other than the 3 phases. I would absolutely love to see the road adjusted so that it could be used for the civic center. Then maybe we get some funds from those buildings that potentially we're going to use it, so we don't have multiple paved areas coming down here. I would love to see the existing building left there. The cinder block is in really good shape. It's got some good bones. If that could be left in there for just like maintenance equipment, and it's plumbed, so we could even have two stalls of male and female bathrooms down there. I mean, it doesn't have to be elaborate, but that could eliminate maybe the use for some porta johns down there. Yeah, I love the idea of the trails and the waterfront, because like everyone else has said, I wasn't on Parks and Rec at that time, but they sold it. I agree with Rhonda on trails, and we had to kind of tell the taxpayers, hey, this is what we're doing with some of your money. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
If I can interject for just a moment, just as a reminder of a little bit of history of how we got to where we are today. We were looking at different options for amphitheater size and capacity, and those options came along with the shift of roadway alignment, whether it was in this configuration for a larger amphitheater or moved further up in order to save the existing block building, which resulted in a smaller amphitheater.
So that building is it right under where that road alignment is, Brian?
It is. It is. So we're certainly happy to adjust this if that's the highest priority desire to keep that block building. But I just wanted to remind everybody of that history and
yeah, I would not want to sacrifice
and the reasons for
the larger
how we arrived at where we are.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thank you.
Next on my screen is Deb. Oh, you're muted, Deb.
There we go. My one question I have is, in this concept, the red dotted line shows the area we're working on, not an actual path that will be going down and around and back up. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay.
Let me just flip back to the concept here.
Okay.
And in this drawing, you can see we have a pathway, ultimately starts up at Elizabeth Lake Road, follows the roadway, crosses the roadway, and then becomes an asphalt path.
Yes.
And if you can follow my cursor, that path continues all the way down, around, and then eventually to the lake shore.
Okay.
So in that option B cost estimate for phasing, this path that I'm tracing with my cursor would be what is installed as part of that.
So then the idea of getting a path to the water, I think is the great idea to get that I like. The parking lot area, yes. But yeah, to get to the water, because otherwise I think people will be parking up here and trying to hike down, or, unsafely, or on uneven, uneven pathways or something, or the roadway that's there now, or the trail that's there now. So I think a pathway to the water is probably pretty critical. That's my major concern with people stopping or going you know, so far into the park, but we need a path, I think, to the water.
And that would be an improved path, so at least with a wheelchair, you could get down there.
Yeah,
That's right. It would be paved.
yeah, terrific. That's my biggest thought. That would be yeah, getting to the water for sure safely. Yeah.
Thank you,
Nice,
Deb.
but thank you.
Oh, if, I didn't know, if you're not done.
Yeah, no,
that's
that was
fine.
it. That was my biggest, I think everybody else has got some great, I mean, I agree with the house and the shelter, or not the shelter, the equipment building, if that could be kept, yes, but like I thoroughly think that people will need a path to the water, because otherwise they'll be going down there anyway and it wouldn't be safe, or you know, yeah, mainly safe. So yeah, just a path to the water would be great. Thank you.
Mary, can I go to the township board members unless?
Yes, please.
Okay. The next closest to me is Liz Smith.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure all the Parks and Rec Committee have had opportunity to speak. Right? I'd rather trustee Powell and I bring up the rear. So
I think all 6 of them spoke.
Yeah, I can't see them, but I trust Justin that everybody spoke.
I think they did, and we can always go back for round 2.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. So bear with me because I have a lot of comments here. So I would be doing a terrible injustice to our residents if we continued along the thought process of a passive park and not recreation for all residents with broad sweep and encompassing more opportunities for unique recreation and enjoyment for our entire township. So I'm actually going to suggest some tweaks to this plan. The first being, and I'm a little out of order here because I took notes as we went through the presentation, so forgive me, a little out of order, Brian, but I think you can bear with me.
Yeah, and Liz, if it's helpful for me to flip back to a certain slide, just let me know.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. So the first thing is a safety concern that I'd like to request is I would love to see a fence around the playground structure for a couple of reasons. One, this is a large park and children can, dart quickly. And I want to give our parents and grandparents peace of mind that their children are safe being on the playground. And there's secondly, there's water in this park. So we need to be conscientious of that. Even in the wetlands, there's water deep enough that children could potentially fall into. So what I have in mind is a fence similar to our neighboring community of Hess Hathaway Park, a wrought iron fence that shuts with a gate. It's really a popular destination for families to go there because their children are safe and stay in one area. So I'd like to request a fence around the playground area. And then secondly, the parking circle, the cul-de-sac area needs to come much closer, as close as we possibly can to the waterfront. It's still quite a distance, and there is room. If we go to slide, Brian, help me out here, but I think there's probably 50 to 100 feet that we can push that closer to the drop-off area, closer to the stretch between that area and the first picnic shelter. So that needs to come as close as we possibly can. Ideally, I'd like to see some handicap parking spots at that picnic shelter near the water. I know that there is a structural issue crossing the wetlands there, so that might not be possible. But we do need to service properly our handicap residents, physically disabled, and of course, senior citizens. That is quite a distance. Even if you move it closer, it's quite a distance to drop off and then park back and walk. Potentially you have senior citizens in their 70s or 80s. They have to drop off a spouse, come back. back and walk again. So I want to get that as close as we possibly can. And I also would like to explore the option of a pull-off or a drop-off if possible to cross those wetlands. I know structurally it might not be possible, but please put your thinking cap on that if it is possible. But at the very bare minimum, that needs to be moved closer. And then I know in the beginning slides, you didn't recommend a dog park and pickleball and things like that. And again, a dog park, I shoulder the responsibility of representing all, 30, pushing 33,000 residents of White Lake Township. And a dog park is a high on the list. So I need to do my job as a trustee and bring that forth again. I did ask for you to plug that in, and unfortunately it's not plugged in. So I do want to see that in this map somewhere. I do believe we might not be able to do a large scale dog park, but I do believe we might be able to fit it in. And the synergy and the green connectivity belt is really important here for the Civic Center. Folks are going to bring their dogs anyways, the Civic Center hub and this park. So I do want to follow through on our residents' request and plug that in and see where we can fit it. Also, as I mentioned, trustees, we shoulder the burden of a different look when we approach township projects. And so that road coming in initially does need to move as close as possible to the Civic Center property line for several reasons. One, it gives us some space there to tuck in some other amenities, and two, it's a safety issue for our police and fire. It can become an alternate drive, and it also allows them to keep an extra eye on the entrance and comings and goings of the park. By moving that road, I think we can fit in a basketball court or a multi-use court. I am not in favor of a passive park here. I'm in favor, like I mentioned, as a unique recreation park. So I see wonderful, beautiful pathways and lots of pavilions, probably too many park shelters and pavilions at this stage. We can always add more later. And I don't see enough to do. I want to represent the growing family in White Lake and in all ages and stages and make this a multi-generational park. So we absolutely need to provide more to do here. A basketball park, bare minimum, it can be used, a basketball court, bare minimum can be used for so many different activities. All ages like to play basketball, chalk, roller skating, kicking a ball, just fun play, for any ages. So I don't see enough to actually do at this park. We are really blessed with passive parks in our community. We have Highland Rec State, we have Pontiac Lake, we have Bloomer Park. So we are so blessed with that already that I don't want to miss this fantastic opportunity to give our residents recreation. So I want to plug in more recreation to this park, and I want to start bare minimum basketball court, which I believe could be fit in this high ground after we scoot that road over as close as possible to the property line of the Civic Center. I'd love to see some exercise points and stops along the way in any of the pathways. I did request that in the previous meeting, and I don't see any of that plugged in. We need to be really conscientious and hone in and shave money and cut costs anywhere we can smartly so that we can allocate those funds to be used the best possible, get our biggest bang for the buck here. So I definitely am going to need a real good explanation of why those bathrooms cost so much. Then the storage building, I know there's many people in the township that would like to forego that building, that we're kind of split on that, half and half. What will happen is we're going to spend money to make that building work for us instead of build a building that we need. So ideally, I liked your initial idea of putting some storage on the back end of the amphitheater, but we need to be very conscientious that that amphitheater might not come down the road for 2, 3, 5 years. We don't know yet. That's not part of the grant process. So instead of that picnic shelter that you're circling there, I'd really like to see the maintenance building just tucked off the beaten path. It really doesn't need to take prime park property. So, and it doesn't need to be anything fancy. It just needs to be, you know, a little bit of storage, perhaps an office, and you know, it doesn't need to be anything. Can be a simple building, and then with the hopes of adding some additional storage behind the amphitheater at some point in time. Thank you for adding in benches. I did request that, and I really appreciate that, that you plugged that in. All ages and stages need benches. This is a very large park. I think I already mentioned that we probably can cut back right now on the picnic shelters. Perhaps some of them can be replaced for cost issues with gazebos at this time, or we can, as a group, collaboratively choose maybe 3, 4 picnic shelters, and then later at additional stages of 2 and 3, add some picnic shelters, but engage the interest. Are they really being used all the time? And then we can add more later, or, you know, 3 or 4 are more than enough. So we probably can cut costs there. You know, a lot of people think that we have some recreation that's great at Holly Park, but I don't want folks to always count on that recreation. That recreation may go in the future. So this is an opportunity for us to use this land for future recreation. I want to be very clear that we are not infringing on Mud Lake. I know that's been brought up a couple times, and I've tried to clarify that. And I just want to be very clear in the record that we are not infringing on Mud Lake. We must seize this opportunity. This is a huge opportunity for White Lake Township and this entire area. And we are so incredibly fortunate to have the Civic Center next door, and then the library north of that. So this is, you know, I say it all the time, a once in a lifetime opportunity. And I want to make sure that we are really, truly in tune with our residents' needs, wants, and desires. And I am bombarded with excitement for this park. And so I want to make sure that we're not just bumping along and being minimalist here, but we're really thinking outside the box, being creative, or stretching dollars. We're, you know, really being creative thinkers here. Then again, I mentioned the synergy and Greenbelt connectivity is really important between this park and the Civic Center. And I did mention that, you know, I don't wish this just to be trails and picnic area, picnic shelters. It needs to be a unique destination. And I do want to clarify that I heard you mention that our residents wish to have trails, which I do concur with that. But I also think that they would like sidewalks in our township and connectivity through our township in other areas. I just don't want that to be misunderstood or misconstrued. And then I am very much looking forward to Mr. Powell weighing in on some material that we might be able to use in the park and be able to cut costs. And that's a good start. I might have some more later, but thank you.
Guess
Mr.
we'll go to
Powell.
Michael. Yeah.
Wow. First of all, I want to apologize to all my colleagues there. I had a conflicting meeting and they both demanded my attention at exactly the same time. So I missed a lot of the presentation by Beckett and Rader and Brian, but I really appreciate going last because the committee really brought me up to speed by all your comments, and I very much appreciate that. Let me ask Marie, is this item number 8 under our discussions or our communications, or is this specifically on the plan?
This is under 6A, Mike.
6A, okay.
We're still in the plan.
All right, good. Because I have, I want everyone to know that I did attend the Lakewood Village Association meeting Monday night. very informative, and the residents there that were in that meeting were very understanding that this park is going to be developed, but they had a number of issues they wanted me to bring up, more fine tuning than anything. And so I don't think it's going to impact, quite frankly, the comments that I'm going to make now on this project, or at least on this phase. I can't agree more with a number of you guys. I do want to make the distinction, because I was on the Park and Rec Committee when we first had the millage, and it was sold on pathways. And I want to make sure that everyone understands that the pathways in here are not what was represented to the people in the public. We're talking about pedestrian and bicycle pathways as a means of transportation, getting places, traveling the township, and not necessarily walking through wetlands. And so we're not talking apples to apples here. So the trails within here will not satisfy those that voted for the millage for trails. So we have to be very cognizant of that. I was very pleased to hear that most of you thought that it was extremely important for all of our residents to be able to have an ease of access down to the lake. And quite frankly, if that's just got to be part of phase one. That's the asset here, is that lake. And what a shame to not allow all of our residents, handicapped or otherwise, to be able to at least get down and visualize the lake. My first impression is that it's an enormous cost in this, and I'm going to highly suggest that we back off maybe the number of trails that are shown. I mean, we have trails 50 feet apart in here. And if you're walking on one pathway and 50 feet over, we have another pathway, that doesn't make sense. When I was involved at the U of M for a redesign of the Diag and areas there, the bare minimum pathways were put in, and then we let the kids decide where the other sidewalks and pathways were going to be. It was just a matter of a year, and they told us where those pathways were going to be because no grass grew. And so it might make some sense to back off of some of the organized pathways that you see here and some of the duplications, and get it down to where, because we can add those 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and let's get it down to where we're at least providing something that is affordable. If we can talk about that cul-de-sac at the end, or the drop-off area, I think that's an extremely important amenity to the park. I believe that the physically challenged people need to be dropped off there. I would, and I apologize if I don't have this right, but it'd be great if that and at least some handicap parking stalls were paved up front in phase one, so that people could drive down, and most of us can park on gravel surfaces. So from that area east, northeast, that can virtually be all gravel, except for maybe an area we'll get at up near Elizabeth Lake Road. But if we could hard surface that, and I concur, that's 120 feet between where that cul-de-sac is and where the area starts necking down. If we can move that a little bit closer, I'm not in favor of putting it in the center there, but offset kind of the way it is, but move it to the west to get it a little bit closer. I concur with Liz's concern that we have a number of people that would very much like to access the lake, and some of them are very independently minded, and they don't want to necessarily have to be pushed in order to get down to the lake shore. I've got to tell the committee that I think the board, and Liz certainly represented herself very, not Liz, well, Liz did too, but Andrea, the feedback that I'm getting from the outlying residents, and I'll get into some comments about Lakewood Association later, but is that this is going to be the most active park in the township. Um, Again, Liz did a good job in outlining all our other parks, and quite frankly, I've been in, I think, every one of them, and I enjoy them, but it's not fun. It's like walking through nature, and I enjoy that, but I have other activities I enjoy as well. This is going to be downtown. We're going to have people that are going to be living in apartments here, and by golly, they're not going to want to drive to a park just to walk around through nature all the time. But as Liz mentioned, they're going to take their dog, their pet, even their cat maybe, and go for a walk, go out to eat, and then walk down to the lake. And this one's going to be utilized for a lunch break. I'm in favor of also what Liz brought up. Well, let's go up to the entrance there, Brian, if you can, please. Okay. It is really critical that drive, and Liz represented it very well, be pushed over, and so did Justin, be pushed over closer to the public safety building. Yes, right in there. They also must have an entrance drive from their parking lot onto this as well. The circulation around the public safety building comes in, and they have to have access to this from their parking lot as well to circulate around their building. And so on one of your, looked like option number 1 from last week, kind of had a little drive off of their parking lot onto this drive. There you go. That's going to be critical. And Liz kind of hinted, the more that we provide access to the Civic Center and to the public safety building, the more monies can be allocated to this project as matching funds in a different fund instead of the Park and Rec Fund. And so that's going to be very important. I like the idea that Liz presented, and it was, quite frankly, I presented it to the Lakewood Village Association, that possibly we can have a laser detector to monitor the cars going back and forth from the Elizabeth Lake Road, so that the police department can hear something and they look out and they see the car passing their windows there, and they can keep track. Is somebody taking a motorized boat down there? Do we have a caravan of motorcyclists going by, or a rack of canoes that are being dropped off down there? It's something to where there's some accountability, and I'll get into that later as well. I agree with Liz that, boy, a basketball court, even if it's smaller in size, people just love shooting baskets in a pickup game. This is going to be the only activity they're going to have when they live downtown here. And it'd be really nice to have something. And I think if that road's pulled over, it doesn't have to be attached to the parking lot. It can have steps going down. It can be tiered down in, so that it's an amenity that we can offer the downtown area people. I'm going to suggest, and I'm sorry I missed it. I just picked up Marie saying she really likes the size and the larger type size of the amphitheater. I'm going to suggest that right up front, and even quite frankly, some of our staff could even do it, or volunteer work, because of the slope of the ground there. You could put in a brick paver circle down at the lower level, clear some trees and brush, and keep that clean, and you can have a amphitheater for much smaller events. Certainly nothing that you're going to advertise on YouTube for, or Twitter or whatever, but you could have a pickup quartet, or singing at Christmas time or something, and right there. Very inexpensive, and then you could grow into the bigger amphitheater, and it might be a really neat way to do something really inexpensive. Again, this area, if you do that and you eliminate, and I'm not sure why the duplicate in pathways there, but that might be an area. And I'm coming at it a little bit differently, and I shared it with Justin. My dumb dog, I let out and it can run 20 acres. And so it doesn't even know what it's like to be constrained. So when I'm thinking a dog park, I'm thinking a fenced in area that dogs can jump around and play. I'm not thinking of a 5-acre field where they can roam and run and catch major Frisbee tournaments and things like that in. But maybe somewhere in there we can designate some kind of dog park, because I agree, people are going to want to take their dog out somewhere. And besides the island in the parking lot where they live downtown here, and maybe have some fun with their dog in an open area a little bit. Let's see. I'm in full favor of exercise stations. Now, I'm not, Marie is an expert at this. I'm not sure how many things can be added in the future as other people put their ideas in. I'm not sure we have to have everything done on this particular plan, but I personally, as I'm walking, would love to get out and go through a circuit and walking and hit one circuit and then do push-ups at another circuit and pull-ups at another one. And I'm getting older, and the more I force myself to exercise, the better I feel. So that would be helpful. The restroom cost, and again, I'm going to be really interested in that because I've designed many of them. I was involved in the design of the one at the M59 and Duck Lake Road. That was $150,000 versus $600,000. In Village of Wolverine Lake, I'm just finishing a large expansion to theirs, and that's at the $100,000 range. And so ADA requirements have some major play, and Beckett and Rader know all that. But maybe we don't have to have 16 stalls. Maybe we can get by with 4 and bring that cost down to where it's a little more reasonable. I am a major proponent of keeping the existing building. There's 60 feet of room between the existing building and the wetland line as delineated on the topo. We'll have to certainly build a couple retaining walls maybe to allow that road to access down on the west side of that existing building instead of maybe coming down where it is now. But it might be better. That area is not going to be used for anything. Yeah, right there, Brian. We can certainly build a roadway in there. It's a limited area. I don't want to encroach upon the building that much because that's a really neat picnic area maybe on the west side of that building, and the well is there. But quite frankly, I think if you rely on your engineers at Beckett and Rader or the township engineers, we can certainly design a roadway between that facility and the wetland line. And that really opens up that amphitheater area for what Liz and I were concerned about, the extra activities that might be to the west of that roadway. And I don't see that roadway being a 30-foot wide road either. It's probably going to be 24 feet with grass shoulders and more country look, and not and certainly not the city type look. I'm total agreements. Thank you for the benches. The cutback on the shelters, I think that Liz had, was a great idea. I really am impressed with Beckett and Rader. I just am. I can't thank you enough, Brian, and your group. You've tried to make as much sense. I'm kind of in the same business you are, Brian, and design by committee is a nightmare. And I think you've done a really, really good job. Now we have to kind of back into the reality of the monies that we have, knowing that there are 7 members on our board that we need to convince to be able to finance this and to approve it. We're all going to have new ideas, the ones that haven't been involved in this. A special meeting was just scheduled to be able to hopefully present this to the board so that we can bring the rest of the board members into all of our thinking. And I'm quite frankly, I'm looking forward to getting some feedback, professional feedback by you, Brian, and your staff on the things that I've said and what Liz has said and what the other members have said. I would also like to ask the pathways, the boardwalks, the ADA and the AASHTO guidelines on boardwalks is just crazy. You got to have a 10-foot wide boardwalk, and they want a 1 foot shoulder on each side of that 10-foot within a boardwalk, within railings of a boardwalk, and you end up with a 14-foot pathway boardwalk because they want everybody and their brother to pass each other both ways 3 times over. So we're going to have to battle that. There's a difference between a bike path, however, and a pedestrian path. And so we might be able to be a little bit more conservative on the width of the pathways and the material, limit the amount of boardwalk and have gravel surfaces up to the boardwalk. And we might be trying to get $2,000 in our boardwalk concept. Remember, we're trying to walk down through here. If you make them narrower and have more wide spots that people can get out of other people's way, and we can have stations to look at the wildlife instead of taking up room on a boardwalk. I know 6 foot is a typical pedestrian walk, but again, you guys are the experts on that. So I've rambled, and I know Liz rambled a great deal, but I'm going to be bulleted with a lot of concerns of the residents if I didn't speak my mind and Liz spoke her mind as well. So thank you for putting up with my rambling, guys.
Thank you, Mike. Brian, do you want to talk about anything? I think we can all talk a little bit again, just in response to our board members. But Brian, why don't you go first?
Sure. As I mentioned, we certainly take a look at moving this roadway to a straight alignment, the way that it was originally shown on the Civic Center concept with a drive directly accessing that. We certainly understand the public safety need for that. We adjusted this way thinking that there were some win-win synergies between the park and between the public safety building by doing this, that the public safety building the public safety parking lot at the lower level may be able to start to extend a little further east and include this area, which would alleviate some of the spatial difficulties that are or challenges that are happening over here. So all that said, we can certainly look at shifting that back over. I know that we will wind up with some extremely severe slopes on the roadway through this portion, and we'll need to think of some alternative accessible pedestrian solutions along that length. So we'll put our heads to that and work towards a solution that's mutually beneficial for both projects. For the roadway over here, I know that the initial thought for pushing the roadway further out was to protect some of the very large mature trees along this line here. You can see some of them ghosted in. So that was some of that mindset. And let me just say that Liz and Mike, I thank you very much for your comments, and all of them are eminently doable. They're very, very achievable. I think we just need to, as a group, come to consensus. The path that's brought us to what is shown on these concept drawings that we're looking at today had input that guided us in some different directions than maybe some of the suggestions that we're hearing this evening. So I think we just need to, as a group, come to a consensus on what the overall desire is, and then we can certainly adjust as appropriate for a consolidated concept plan.
Okay, I guess I'll start. I mean, I think we have to listen to our board members, and I mean, it's a concept plan. So as far as grants, the concept plan can still be adjusted quite a bit. Like, for example, that cul-de-sac is not set in stone as
Right.
far as a grant application. The entrance drive would be a scope item, and that would be part of that cost. But as far as where it could be, I also had hoped, and I know it's hard to change drawings sometimes, that the cul-de-sac would move closer to the lake and maybe even have a few accessible spots right next to that, right by that opening, still leaving that open for
Right.
people. Yeah, right there. And I'm not adverse to putting a little more activities, fitness stations, and I'd even put the pickleball courts down here. They're small, like maybe where what this one of the picnic shelters is, or some of the other lawn areas, just a little area like that. So I'm not adverse to making it more fun, more things to do. As you say, people are going to be living here, and the more people you have in the park, the less problems you have in the park in some regards, as far as having responsible people playing tennis or doing their fitness walk will kind of keep people that have other ideas away. So I think it's good to make things that are attractive beyond the picnic and the play lot, to have a few more things to do. I don't see it as a place for, as even though it's a large park, the dog park, if we were going to do something really big, it's
No.
actually not much real estate, but I'm not adverse to, some kind of area tucked away for a dog run that's, kind of bigger. I don't know. I've actually been to a lot of sessions about dog park, but I haven't gotten that far in to know what's the minimum, that we could provide. Obviously, I've seen dog runs at various rest areas and that sort of thing. So we'll trust that our consultants can give us a suggestion there. I think we're close on the design. I'd like to see it broken into 4 applications. You don't want to go all the way down to 25% if it was trust fund, because with being a high income community, the competition would hurt us that way. So you'd want to get your match up probably to 30% or something like that. So I'd like to see it broken up into like 4 kind of equal sized of a meal, so to speak, so that we can stretch it out, as you say, over years to get things done and make it the way we want to do it. The first phase, if we can load that up a little heavier than the other 3, maybe not so equal, just so we can get all the way down to the lake. Maybe we just do gravel and a few paved parking spots at the end here so that people can get down here. But I'm going to have to defer to our consultant and the township about what they would like to see. I think we don't have a lot of time if we're doing an application this year, and but I know we have to have something ready within a month for them. So kind of what I see just offhand based on our board member comments. Does anyone else who's a committee member? I can't see anybody now, so I'll return to
Oh, I'm
Justin.
sorry. Go ahead.
I'd like to say something eventually after Kathleen.
Yep.
Doesn't matter who goes first.
Go ahead, Kathleen.
Thank you, CJ. I respect and understand our board members wanting to be true to the requests and the needs of our citizens. But I also think that, with this phasing, and was it Justin that said this might take 10 years? I'm just curious, can we start out with a basic plan, one of the plans like we talked about today, and kind of, let people get a feel for the space, let people come and see what it's like, and down the road add things like basketball, exercise equipment. I think it's going to take some time for us to get used to this space, see how it is, let the community grow into it. Is there any reason that we couldn't, put these things on the back burner for a bit and add it later? Just kind of, get a basic start and make this, like we talked about, a 3-phase project.
I can just briefly jump in here on that because the board members or the committee members maybe not be privy to the plan for the Civic Center area. We're looking to provide for an area that is extremely sought after by a developer in downtown areas. And so a part of that is bringing residents that want to live downtown. And this park will be one of the major amenities that people look at to move downtown. So to say, yeah, you're going to have a basketball court, but it's going to be 10 years from now, they'll say, well, all right, I'll move into downtown in 10 years then. So we're trying to do everything we can to be as symbiotic as we can to attract people that want to live downtown, and this park is a major part of it. So you kind of have to put a different hat on as well. Totally understand where you're coming from, Kathleen, but I just wanted to share with you something else that's going on behind the scenes that you may not have known about.
Perhaps then, Mike, you wouldn't mind maybe telling us, like, when do you plan on building these, what apartments? I mean, are they like coming in the next couple of years? Or are they going to kind of follow the same timeline as we're talking about with the park?
I'm going to tell you that I'll bet that in 2 years, you have apartments going up and people living downtown. That's how aggressive I think the board and the developer is going to want to be. Now, all of that can change if we get another COVID attack, all bets are off. But we are going to be interviewing 3 national developers that want to help us build our downtown. And part of that includes apartments and condominiums, townhouses, in order to get people downtown. The businesses need it. And for an active downtown area, you have to have people that want to live down there and walk around downtown. And that's what we're trying to do.
Mary, can I piggyback off of what Mike just said?
Oh, certainly.
So the township had a housing analysis done by the Chesapeake Group when they were doing the study for the Civic Center area. And I think that the township and the public should expect density in the Civic Center and potentially up to 300 residential units. So that's the type of the scope and the magnitude of what we're trying to create is really a downtown that's dense and populated.
I like Kathleen's. I was able to read your lips there, Kathleen. Wow is right.
Yeah, if I may also, I concur with Mr. Powell's comments. So we certainly could add things later, but we actually need to just do it in the opposite direction. It needs to be our most desirable items first, within reason of cost, and then add perhaps, additional picnic shelters or things like that as we gauge the interest in the park. So certainly we can add things later, but it just needs to go in that opposite direction.
Okay, I'll go ahead then if Kathleen's done. So I really think it's critical to keep the building, echo the concerns of Mr. Powell and Andrea and Mary about that as well. I think, we already kind of have something there with value. It's going to cost us money to build something for down the road. So if we could at all shift the road a little bit to keep that, I think that's important. As Andrea said, I guess it's already plumbed. Could already have, the wells right there for bathrooms. Maybe it'll get us by for a short period of time before we can get down to the main pavilion bathroom down by the lake. At least we'd have something to offer residents. while they're enjoying the park. And I have two questions for Mr. Powell. As I know you mentioned in the past you played pickleball, and seeing as that the dog park and all these other amenities that Liz brought up, the residents would like to see. I know that they really were advocating for a pickleball area, and the downtown area I think should have something like that to give the residents, the older residents who enjoy the pickleball, that avenue and that space in the park. So my question is, as you've already said, you played pickleball in the past, Mr. Powell, but like, how big is the court? Is it a size of a basketball court? Could it be like a mixed use where we build a basketball court and it can be used as a pickleball if it was striped? And I guess my other question after that is, if it's going to be a joint venture with the township for creating the desirable amenities, is the township going to be advocating money from the general fund in addition to what we have for Parks and Rec for the park, or how would that work?
I think that's an excellent question. Those are excellent questions, CJ. And there are, the pickleball court is, I'm going to say, is about half the size of a regular basketball court. And yes, you can certainly have those together. The problem is that you'll get a young group that wants to play basketball the same time the old group wants to play pickleball, and you don't want to have that issue. Now you can put the basketball hoops in the opposite direction outside and maybe extend out the pickleball court, and then have the basketball outside the area of the pickleball court. Pickleball is a fun, much faster game. Even youngsters are utilizing it. But I think it's to have them both together, I think is problematic.
Yeah.
I'll tell you where my mind is. I'm thinking that the Civic Center area is going to need a great deal more parking than is used on a daily basis. So in my mind, overall in the Civic Center area, I'm thinking, quote, maybe a tennis court or two with maybe a couple pickleball courts over there to supplement what we do here, that's used during the day for parking and after hours as tennis or pickleball, and an overflow parking. But in the meantime, we need really those activities here on the smaller scale. The pickleball, there's even deck tennis that can be built up on decks, and that's a lot of fun. That's much like pickleball, but played on a deck. We have to be a little bit careful, and Brian will appreciate this. We have some areas down here as you approach the wetlands that'll be a little bit more unstable and subject to a great deal of frost heave and groundwater issues, and so we have to kind of keep the solid courts a little further away from the wetlands. Otherwise, they get destroyed over the winters. But you're thinking along the same line, and that question will be brought up at the board level as to how much of the general fund might be available to help the park if, in fact, it's going to assist in the marketing of the Civic Center and the downtown area. So that,
and I guess to follow up on it for pickleball, I know we have the senior center right now, kind of over by the church, St. Pat's. Is there any way that we could offer the residents a pickleball area, I guess, within our current system that we have, if they want it, unused parking, if we could do something over there to supplement in the meantime until we get the Civic Center built out? Because we only have so much acreage here to work with on the park, and I don't really want to pack all this. It's great to have all these amenities, but if we're putting them on top of each other, like what we just discussed with the basketball and pickleball, it kind of doesn't work well for everybody. So in the meantime, is there any way that we could provide an amenity cheaply to the residents to have a pickleball?
Well, you threw the word cheaply in there, and that throws everybody for a loop. Keep in mind that a half basketball court, none of you youngsters can still run a full court. We can't. So if you have basketball hoops over 10 feet apart, I get winded. So if you had a couple small areas that you could have pickup basketball, even if it's just one-sided, those kind of things. yes, the Dublin Center Vetter Park has some area that we might be able to do that. Keep in mind that the seniors are coming here eventually,
Right.
but temporarily, that can certainly be looked at. Yes.
Yeah, because I know that a lot of people called in about 2 meetings ago and were really, advocate supporters of pickleball and how they have to travel to Clarkston and just, trying to please everyone. I know that, you really can't do everything on the list, but seeing as that, dog park and all this other stuff's being included, I don't want those people to feel like left out who really, were advocate supporters of that and wanted that. So. That's
Well,
all
I'll tell you what, the way the business has been lately, we could probably approach JCPenney and put 2 or 3 pickleball courts in their parking lot and they wouldn't even know it. So
Right.
we might approach them.
Well, if I may, it might be a possibility, sounding from your explanation, Mr. Powell, that pickleball could go, it's being tossed around that the senior center might go on the back end of the civic center in the parking lot there.
Right.
Pickleball could potentially go there and be played after hours in the civic center parking lot. And then we could still have a half court basketball here.
Yes.
Towards the top entrance. Basketball is just my beginning point. Yeah. I imagine, like, I hope we have a natural slope here. We could make a great little sledding spot for the kids in the winter. And I really want to stretch you and push you and think and have you think outside the box of what kind of recreation we can provide our community here, because the possibilities are endless and some of them are not expensive. So, basketball, we want to make this, we are, our 4-season playground, and we want to make this our most active and used park. So I want to stretch your thinking, everybody on the board, and I want to thank you for your input and suggestions and getting us to this point. And thank you, Brian, for doing an omen's job here of incorporating all of our suggestions. But there's many things we can do to create some recreation. A sign for an exercise spot isn't a costly recreation, where we can have along the pathways some exercise stops. That's not a huge cost. So just with some creative thinking, we can incorporate more recreation into this park.
I think we're also an advantage too, having, Mr. Powell as an advisor to the park committee, because he's got so much knowledge and design experience of engineering that he really helps out the township to give us a different view, in addition to our consultants that we have as well. So I think we're in a good place.
Well, and another thing that we need to think about is we need to think about all age groups. The park needs to be multi-generational. So like for me, I represent the growing active family in White Lake. And so we need to be cognizant of that, of their desires, and multi-generational, where the active grandparent and Mr. Powell wants to come and bring his grandchildren. And he's still active though, I know he's still very active recreationally. So, we need to think of all ages here, and the young professionals, such as you, CJ, you might want to come down here with your friends and play basketball. We really need to think that we're taking a broad sweep of recreation to encompass as many residents as possible.
And I agree with everything you're saying, Liz. Like, to get as much amenities as possible to the park. That's why we have the land. Some things like the disc golf just isn't feasible, because it's going to take up too much space of the park, and I get that. But as much as everything else that we could try and put in there, I'm all in favor to make it, great for everyone. So.
Okay, can we talk to, there's Andrea and Deb. I'd like to hear from
I just
everybody.
make a comment real quick. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
I don't want to try to take away the farm, but the Civic Center site for public safety building and Township Hall, we're looking at a potential estimate on the high side of $35 million. So while I would love general fund support for the park, I don't know, the Civic Center.
Don't count on it.
Don't count on it. So.
Yeah. Understood. Maybe Deb, can you, are you still here?
Yeah, I want to say I agree with Mike in 100% in that when he was talking about the millage passing and the trails, that is nothing to do with trails inside the park. It is
That's right.
trails on roads like Bogey Lake Road or the triangular to get to places like this park. So yes, I agree with that 100%. The budget is really important. So if we can get, however we can get the biggest bang out of this budget money. So if it comes down to numbers, which it seems like it is, find that total, the top number that we can apply for and what we get with that. If it is a playground, if it is the pickleball court and the path to the water, that's what we have to do. Start with the top dollar amount and go from what we can get with that money. The supply house, but yes, as much as we can get initially with the top dollar that we can apply for.
That's a great point, Deb.
Yeah. So I'm going to start off, and anybody join in here. What I would recommend initially is probably the entranceway, bathrooms, because that makes the park, porta johns aren't real desirable. So, and the main picnic shelter, bathrooms, the entrance in, access to the water, and then maybe one recreation draw, like a basketball court or a kayak launch or something that is an activity. And then anyone else feel free to chime in here, but I think that would the initial stage. And Mary, please guide us here on what is best for the grant process, because I know we can't put all of our number one things up front, or we won't hit our marks for 2 and 3 stage.
Yeah,
But
I'm just looking at the dollar figure there.
Yeah, if we come on it, well, we got to talk about those bathrooms, Brian. But so I think if we come in with the initial entrance, a main pavilion, pathway to the water, and some bathrooms, does that sound like a good initial base here? And then let's kind of, if anyone would mind chiming in. I
would
really
just
need an
say that-
explanation on the bathrooms, Brian,
Yeah.
because that cost is astronomical to us.
And also, I personally like to separate the restrooms from the shelters, because somebody rents the shelter and, you have to go up there and they're all in their party and it's awkward. So I kind of like those separate.
Sure.
Okay.
So they can certainly be separate structures. Combine them into a single cost and can separate those out.
Does that include all the utilities, like
It
the
does.
septic field? Yeah.
Well,
Oh.
let me explain that a little bit more.
Okay.
So there are ancillary improvements included in those numbers, which is why they're, they appear high. Let me start by saying that the shelter was envisioned as a primary signature piece in the park. It is scaled on, actually, let me just go back to it is scaled on the drawing as a 60-foot diameter octagon. So it's a quite a large structure. Accommodates a good number of people for a community event or a large family reunion or whatever the case may be. But the point is that it's a large structure with a lot of capacity. And there's a cost associated with that. So it could certainly be scaled back into a smaller structure with smaller dollars. The rest, we've also included in that number bringing power down into the lower end of the park so that the shelter and the restroom both have power available. The restroom itself, we have figured as an off-the-grid type restroom facility that would utilize harvested rainwater and have very low flow, environmentally sensitive fixtures where the wastewater would go to a vault system and then would occasionally be pumped according to uses. So it's, it's an eco-friendly system and is appropriate for this lower end of the park where getting water and septic in these low-lying conditions would be difficult and costly. The cost for that type of restroom, and I think the one that we looked at had two family style restrooms separated by a small mechanical room, and the cost for that was around $200,000 or so. So between the very large shelter and the restroom, and then the ancillary improvements such as pavements, earthwork, getting power from the upper side of the park, all those types of things go into that cost. We can certainly scale that back if that's the desire.
If I may, would there be any significant cost savings? It's a very beautiful design to have it as focal point of the park. But is there any cost savings in moving it north of the play structure?
Not significantly.
Okay.
I think the thought was that we definitely wanted the restrooms in this lower end of the park, so that people in this core use area can use the restrooms without going all the way to the north end of the park or elsewhere. But whether the restroom or the shelter is in the location it's shown or 100 feet to the north doesn't really make a significant difference. There's a synergy in where it's located now too, because there's a natural opening in the tree canopy. So all of the elements we're showing are located in an effort to preserve as many of the existing trees as we possibly can.
No, it's a beautiful spot and it's centrally located, and I do appreciate that, and that's very user friendly for park goers. But we need to shave costs off of it. So what do you recommend?
Yep. So simple answer is greatly reducing the size of the shelter, and we can look at alternative restroom systems that are maybe waterless. And
I mean, if you separate the shelter from the restroom costs, it's not, and if you went to prefabricated shelters, I know that you were talking about a signature, which might mean an architect and might mean site built, and maybe prefab might be something more reasonable. I don't think we've heard from Andrea. I know we're getting kind of down to the nitty gritty here, but can we hear from Andrea?
I'll be quick. In this park, we just need to figure out what we want for this park. So we need to differentiate what we want and what we wish for this park. I do realize this is going to be our downtown area, but that's a big area to cover. And so, we obviously don't have $5 million. So we're going to figure out what our wants are and what our wishes are for this park and go from there. And I'm all set.
Thank you.
I'd like to say something after Rhonda, because I know we haven't heard from her yet. So I want to give her a chance to get in there.
Back to trails or pathways, I guess I should call them. But, once again, the voters said what, we push those pathways and trails. So we still have to consider that tri-trail.
Yes.
And then which leaves not a whole lot of anything. So unfortunately, whatever initial phase is chosen, it's got to be done as simple yet nicely as possible. The part of the group that I was with at Hawley Park, and I think that the general consensus of the participants in that meeting was to keep it as natural and simple as possible. sometimes less is more. I understand that you want to have a draw for the Civic Center and residents moving into that, but why not make part of some of these goals part of that Civic Center development? Not that they can afford it any more than parks can afford it, but I mean, if there's no money, there's just not the money. And I would hate to see such a beautiful area just jam packed with activities, you know, and I'm not a designer. That's why we have Beckett and Rader, because they can come up with ways to make those things come into the natural beauty of that area. But those are my thoughts.
Thank you.
So I agree with what Liz was saying with what we need to get started. I think we can all agree that we need, number one, the most important thing is to get a trail from the road or a parking area to the lake. I think that's number one, the most important thing that we all need to agree on, is to get this thing going. That's where I see. And as far as saving some cost on the bathroom, my opinion is maybe we can cut down the size on the main bathroom down in the center of the park and utilize, as Andrea was saying, the plumbed, already ready building up at the front to kind of, instead of having one giant bathroom and down at the end of the park, split up and have two bathrooms, one up at the top and then one down at the bottom. And maybe in the meantime, until we can afford to put in such a large bathroom down, or maybe just utilize porta potties like what we use at Holly Park just to get us going with our current building. If we can retrofit that and get some bathrooms up there, that's what I'm thinking. And as far as, I think the most important thing is getting the trail going down to the lake, because that's what everyone is going to be going to the park for. So I think everyone needs an accessible way to get down there. And then we can build on after that. And I like what Liz was saying as well with the fence around the playground. I think that's important to separate everything for everyone's safety. So I think that'd be good too.
Well, that's a lot of information that's coming in. I just want to be realistic on how much we could put forward for match, providing like a 50% match that would go in through a trust fund application and a duplicate land and water application. I would say 90% chance it would be funded. If it's funded, would be through land and water. There's a lot more some more paperwork involved with a federal grant. But that most of those applications are funded. And then if you are trying to go beyond $1 million project, including your engineering, that's more than $500,000 out of our funds, which I just don't know that we have. So, Brian, how much? Let's see. I mean, for us to meet with we have 3 of our board members with us, and I don't know if Brian has enough information from a committee and some board members to determine. I think we're kind of with option 4, and I'm trying to think maybe we can get to the beach, but maybe we can't build out the features of the beach, like just do the pathway to the beach at this point, and then get the road down to the first parking lot and the path all the way to the beach. And then do we have any money left in a $1 million budget to work on a park shelter? Or I know there's some other restroom products that are environmental that maybe don't involve as much, and I'll send you some of that information to anyone who's interested in that might let us have some more time, especially if we're saving the building. I don't want the building, I like the building and everything, but I'm concerned about not being able to, whether it's an amphitheater or more of a little sports center up at the top in the future. I don't want to, I'm just worried about getting down that hill, and I don't want a block building to preclude what we really want to do. So that's less information than you need, Brian. So
I have a question too.
Yes.
In in the attempt to save that block building, to save money in the long run? Is it going to cost more money because you have to build roads around it, or that? That's another thought.
Right.
Right. So there is a thought process, and like I mentioned, there's a real mixed bag whether to keep the building or not. So one thought process within the township department and officials are to keep the building. It's a cost saving measure. Bathrooms possibly can go in there because the well is nearby and it's already somewhat of a structure. And then the opposite thought process on that is it will cost us more to turn it into what we need it to be, instead of just starting from scratch and building a storage building that is actually conducive to our needs. So so your committee will make a recommendation to our board as the process, and then the township board will ultimately decide to keep or forego that building. As of now though, Brian, it's not in here, right? It's not in your slides. So if we move the road, how does that affect the building if the building is decided to be kept? Does that affect the building at all?
There would be
Moving the road will be priority for public safety.
Right. So adjusting this portion of the roadway is a priority as we've been talking. Keeping the building, there would be two options to do that. One would be to bring a road along the south side of that building along the edge of the wetland, which would have impacts and removal of the existing significant trees. The other option would be to swing the roadway further north around the building, which would basically result in a smaller placeholder for a future amphitheater with less capacity.
Okay, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, but just off the cuff here. If we forego that building and we build a storage area somewhere else on the property, to not take away from the beauty of the park or future pavilion gazebos or picnic shelters, where would you recommend to tuck a new storage building? But if we're going to build a new one, personally, I'd like it kind of tucked out of the way and not. I think it'd just be more aesthetically pleasing to not be in the beauty of the park.
We'd have to think a little bit more about that. Our initial thought was tucking it back in this area, which I know is not, which I know is not completely ideal.
I think that's prime real estate, so I'd rather see it up by the trailhead.
Up in this area?
Yeah.
Let me just throw out another thought, though, two thoughts very quickly. Remember that you can't design this in a vacuum. So the same equipment that might be used to maintain the park will probably be used to maintain the Civic Center area. So you can't put it so far away from the Civic Center that it makes it inconvenient to do that. Brian, a third alternative, which would be kind of cool, think outside the box a little bit, and have the eastbound lane go above the building and the southbound lane go around the west side of the building. So split the roadway so you don't take out as many trees with one roadway. Just as a thought.
I think most of us would like those trees to remain. They're beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would feel very bad if the most significant trees were cut down.
Totally concur.
For a maintenance building.
Yes, totally.
So just for clarity of direction, is it the board's decision to keep the building or replace the building?
Can I summarize what I think the consensus has been over the last couple of hours and then maybe some direction moving forward? It sounded like that the consensus was to or at least majority said, keep the existing building, try to incorporate some more active recreational amenities, moving the driveway, looking at some potential small fenced off areas for dogs, cutting back on costs, cutting back on the trails and boardwalks is not to be duplicative, exercise points. I think I have a pretty good list here. Moving the cul-de-sac closer to the wetland crossing, priority for phase one of grant is getting people to the water. I think because we could talk all night here about this. I don't think we're ready to move forward on a recommendation at this point, based on the discussion tonight. And I guess I would ask Brian and the committee, if we could reconvene at a special Parks and Rec meeting 2 weeks from today, say, I don't know if that's January 27th at 6:00, would that give Beckett and Rader enough time to work with staff to incorporate the comments from tonight, and then maybe hone in on a phase one of what would be included in a grant application?
I was thinking tomorrow night, Justin.
Tomorrow night? I don't know about that.
That means Mike's going to be doing all the drawing changes.
That's fine with us. I would just like to narrow in and try to get some definitive direction on a couple items that seem, that we seem to have a few differing opinions on. One of those is keeping the building or not, and the resulting impacts of the placeholder for the amphitheater. And then the other would be budget on a first phase. Mary mentioned maybe a project total of around $1 million for a first phase, and just want to see if that's a good consensus for everyone and a target that we should shoot for in developing some options.
I think so, because next year's millage collection, if we really pinch our pennies this year, we might have $800,000 if we're really careful. So if it's $1 million and we match that 50%, that would take our fund balance to around 300,000, probably a little bit less. But I think
one question I have
really works for land and water, but until and if they raise the trust fund to 500, that would leave us, short on even a 50-50 application in trust fund.
I think the township board needs to know that stuff, Marie, because we might, Mike Roman is, Treasurer Roman's very creative. We might be able to loan some money from trusted agency or somewhere else in order to get this thing moving.
One question I have.
That's an idea that our millage would pay back.
Right.
Well, we can have a bigger initial project.
Right.
One question I have for Mr. Powell and for Brian, is there any way that we could shift the amphitheater a little bit more to the right and shift it towards the parking lot and allow it to, I guess, remain almost in the same place, but gain enough clearance for the roadway to come through for the building to remain there? Because it almost sounds like if we wanted to have a building for maintenance, it would ideally almost be in the exact same location that the building is in on the north side of the property, to have it close to the civic center. But is there any way to shift the amphitheater without changing the size more to the right?
I think that's brilliant. I think that's brilliant. You may be able to just twist it 20 degrees counterclockwise.
And put it more back into the woods a little bit and allow you to have the same size, but allow the road to save the building that way.
That's a good idea too.
Looks like it's laid out with the contours, so.
Yeah, we can take a look at that. It might just require some more grading
Yeah.
and manipulation to be able to do that. And keep in mind too that we're looking at this in two-dimensional plan view.
Mhm.
The thought
Yeah.
process going into this is three-dimensional.
I know it's a big slope there too, a big drop
With-
down, a
Yeah.
perfect location for
Right.
that.
So the thought process into this is three-dimensional, and we're thinking about grades. So it's not only the the plan view limits of the roadway, but it's also the slope grading on both sides of that roadway and the slope grading between the amphitheater and the roadway, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So,
Just seeing
so
you know,
those are
from
some of
my-
the things that we're thinking about. But CJ, I think your thought is a good one, and we'll look at
I'm
rotating
just
that
thinking it's easier to
amphitheater,
move a
pushing it a little
amphitheater.
bit to see if we can gain anything there.
I mean, I think it's just easier to move a non-existent currently amphitheater 20 feet than to get rid of a building to then rebuild a building and, just to get enough clearance to the road, maybe it would work out. So it's just something I had an idea I wanted to throw out there. So
Yeah.
Keep in mind,
Also-
Brian, keep in mind, Brian, that you're moving that road to the northwest, I mean. So you're going to be dealing with that slope further to the northwest, and you're going to have a much better ability to grade into that building as you move that road further to the left.
Right.
And he put it all the way, I mean, isn't there a building right on the property line, or I see the parking lot. Is that the building line?
It is, but
Yeah.
we can,
So, I mean,
we can
we-
slope down from there.
Yeah, what I meant, how close the road could get to that wall.
We just
Moving it that
designed that
way.
wall around it. Right. We engineers can be very ingenious.
Yeah, well, that's one way to put it. We'll build our park first before the civic center, and first come,
There you
first serve.
go.
So I've been just
So
small
just in
question.
some,
If that
I'm
built, if we so currently the building's not there, but we all kind of know where it is, where these arrows are. So is there enough room? We are all talking about storage, but realistically, we don't have a lot of things to store for this park, and we will potentially gain some storage at the back of the amphitheater. But keep in mind, the amphitheater could be several years down the road. So we do want to have some storage in the meantime. But would there be, with the existing building there, Brian, would we have enough to put in just a small men's and women's, like 2 stalls or something, and some storage in that building? I do kind of like Mary's thought to keep the restrooms away from the beautiful center pavilion, or separate them at least. So is that a possibility, just to start out with some bathrooms up here at top, since we're going to have the initial parking up top perhaps in phase 1, and storage in that existing building? Big enough for that?
yeah, the existing building is, I don't recall the exact dimensions off the top of my head, but it's certainly sizable enough for some storage and restrooms.
Okay.
I want to say it's almost like a 4-car garage, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I've been in them and I thought there's enough room for that, because we're really not, I'm not really sure. We're all talking a lot about storage, but I'm not really sure what we're going to potentially store in it. Because down the road, we will, just have our maintenance come over from the Civic Center if need be.
A lot of times, park maintenance contracts are contracts and not stuff that we don't have a parks department,
Yep.
Build it and we will fill it.
Let me remind you, it must only be in support of this park and not other storage for the township.
Right. We'll roll up the Moby mats in the winter and put them in there.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, but realistically, we probably don't need a lot of storage initially. Maybe we would need some more storage once the amphitheater came along, but initially I can't think of much that we would store in it, actually, because it
You know,
is
maybe-
mainly for this park.
Maybe we don't even need to keep the entire building, so I'll cut some of it off, and it's a big building. I don't know that we need it all. I just don't want it to drive the design. It's a block
Right.
building. It's not super, it's just walls right now. It's not like
Right.
this amazing thing.
Right, I agree, yeah.
Okay, how the 2-week thing, and And Justin, you are charged with interpreting all these different opinions for Brian.
Yeah. So if you're not happy at the next meeting, don't, hold my feet to the fire. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I think that, we have it on tape. So, and I have been taking notes throughout this meeting. I think I understand the general consensus and where we need to get. So if everyone is available 2 weeks from today at 6 o'clock, we can start earlier because it's a special meeting. So it would be January 27th at 6. The goal at that time would be to see a design concept that's incorporated what we've talked about tonight, and then a phase 1 grant application based on township budget and what we could realistically afford. And Mary, if you don't mind, I could maybe consult with you as we move forward over the next couple of weeks.
Yep.
One thing I want to address for Brian, because I know he's really concerned about, number one is keeping the building or leaving it, which we discussed. If we can ideally keep it, it'd be fine. And if we can shift the amphitheater, that would allow the room, hopefully, to do that. But number two is other important question was, how much money are we looking to put up at this for phase 1 project? So, I know several people talked about $1 million, maybe it might be cutting it a little bit too close for the balance that we want to keep in the Parks Fund. Maybe somewhere around 800,000-900,000 we might want to consider. I don't know what you think, Mary, about how much we would need for a grant application and for the phase 1 idea of getting down to the lake and getting the roadway and pathway in.
Yeah, it seems like there's like some minimum things we want to do with this when we open the park as the centerpiece of the township. That might cause us to talk to Michael about talking to the treasurer and borrowing a little bit. I still think we need to move ahead with other pathways and sidewalks along the triangle and other places once this application is done. And there's maybe alternate between those two projects, but that's a discussion for another day.
Well, I just wanted to get a rough idea for Brian as far as how much he needs to plan for to try and get our ideas that we really want to get done in phase 1 out there.
Counting the engineering, you'd be, that's
north of $1 million again.
Well, either going to go north of $1 million, and the grant, like the trust fund grants right this year, is only 300,000. I feel like it's going to go higher in 22, but right now the land and water grants are going to 500,000 because there's supposed to be more money coming to the state from the Park Service. So that is $200,000 more. So I'm kind of leaning that way, even though
there's more for us to put up front.
There's a lot. Well, yeah, you'd have to put up the $500,000. You'd have to
put up
$500,000 to get $500,000.
Getting the land and water, would we be able to qualify, do you think, based on your knowledge, if we had a trail
most
going
land and
to the
water
water
applications are funded.
Well, if we get
most
a trail going to the water, then would that, I guess, technically qualify because we're getting to the water?
There's no natural resources points in the land and water fund. That's more of a recreation type grant, but so it wouldn't matter whether you got exactly to the water or near to the water. But it still would score well. And as I say, most communities can't come up with that half match.
So maybe I guess we need to go, because we're spending the most on phase 1 is what I'm getting at from everybody. We're going to be spending the most money on phase 1. So maybe we should try and get the most money to us in a grant as quick as possible to get this going. And then we can supplement down the road and go for a trust fund grant for smaller
other ventures. Stuff. Like the actual kayak launch and the shelter, if we spent some money on some other things that make it a usable place that a family can spend time and have a restroom, that kind of thing.
Yeah, because I don't want Brian to go off for 2 weeks and not know kind of where we're all coming from as far as a budget and where we want to go with it. So that way he can put together the best case scenario for everybody for the phase 1 project. So that's all I had to say on it. So
can I ask last question?
Yes.
I want to go back to what Rhonda said, because this has kind of been bugging me, because we had the meeting at Holly Park with with the citizens, and I'm hearing two very different things, and I'm wondering when the two might collide. Very clearly at that meeting, the public hearing, people wanted this left natural, and I have to say, I'm kind of news to me that we're expecting this high density use. And at what point are you going to let the citizens know that we're intending to make this actually a high density area? And in my mind, that's not really what I would conceive of as natural. I think that some of the plans, you're trying to stuff too much in here, and with all the things that have been suggested, I can't imagine how that's going to be kept natural. So I think you're going to run into some problem down the line, and I wonder at what point you're going to include this bigger plan of this downtown civic center and its density to the people that came to the other public hearing meeting.
So if I may, we as a board have been talking about it for a good 2 years in our township board meetings. And then the vision screening was a great participation for White Lake history, but I think, as I mentioned before in a board meeting, it was a small a sample of our 32,000 residents. And then we additionally had the survey that had some other results. So as board members, Ms. Voorhees, Mr. Powell, and myself, we have, our board's contacted by residents, and we've been talking about the Civic Center and this main hub for several years, and we do have an obligation to represent our entire township. So that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to do our best to represent the whole township.
Well, perhaps during the next public hearing or, presentation to the public, you should let them know that there's a bigger plan and include them in on that. I do admit that I have just recently retired and have not kept up with a lot of what's going on currently. And I think that probably a lot of other people, my neighbors included, and quite a few other people are not really familiar with this plan. And maybe we should encourage them to come to some more board meetings. It's a little difficult these days and age with COVID, but I think some people are going to be pretty surprised.
Well, I'm just going to say that as a park planner by trade, I think that some of these, what we say, more active uses can still be tucked in here. But the park is 80% wetlands. So there's only the small area that still, I don't think we've changed the concept down by the picnic shelter very much, except maybe to add a few amenities such as pickleball courts or some exercise stations. That's still essentially the same as we have, and it's limited by the small space that you can develop. And then I feel that we're just tweaking it. I still feel it'll be a natural setting park where you walk by on the lake. I see some things we can still fit in without taking away from the natural setting. But
And to be honest, so in 2 weeks, you're not going to see an active sports park.
No.
But to be honest, I don't know if you'll see a dog park either. That's going to be really hard to get a dog park in here with trying to squeeze in active recreation. I'm just trying to be honest. I know that was that came up tonight. I don't know if, based on the direction of getting active recreational amenities, if that's going to happen. So we'll look at it.
We just have very little real estate. That's not to say we can't develop those things at other sites.
So
that's our job to take all this input and weave it together. So don't fret too much about what may or may not show up right now. We've heard your input. Caitlin is on the line here recording everything. Hi,
Caitlin.
So that's
hello, everybody.
That's our next step over the next 2 weeks to take all this, weave it together into something that's aesthetically.
Yeah, and we have an extra meeting, and I think that is warranted, so that
So Brian, thank you for that comment, because just from the flip side of that, to be respectful of Andrea and Mike Powell and I and the rest of the board, we are requested by residents a lot. That's like one of the top things, is to have a dog park here. So we're doing our job and bringing those residents' voices forward. And maybe it won't be the typical dog park, like maybe it's a version of it, or a compromise, or an area that's not 5 acres, but it's something, you know. And so I appreciate Brian's comment of, you know, let us kind of twirl that around a little bit and see the possibilities. So maybe it's not the typical dog park, but maybe it's some kind of compromise. So thank
And
you.
of
Thank
course,
you
the
for,
park will be open to dogs on
Mhm.
leashes anyway,
Yeah.
in addition. All right, I think I think we need to move on. I don't think we're gonna make any motions tonight. We'll take a look, and thank you, Brian and Caitlin, for our short window in our, you know, this happens a lot in these kind of projects, so appreciate your patience. I guess I need to look at the agenda, so if you can, yeah, unshare there, and then I'll go back to where we are. So we talked about the park funds and budget discussion as part of that. And Justin, do you think we should, there's no more to say. We talked about how much we might
covered it.
spend.
I think
So we're gonna
covered
go
it.
right on and talk a little more about the Wilson Foundation application for design, or
Just briefly. So I know the Township Triangle Trail was mentioned tonight. Last week, we submitted a grant application to the Wilson Foundation, or the Wilson Community Foundation, for a $50,000 grant to aid in the design and engineering of the Triangle Trail, the 1 mile that's remaining. That is estimated to cost $100,000 just to do the design and engineering work. So if we are fortunate enough to receive funding, the $50,000, then the township will, you know, have 50% of the design work covered, and then we'll actually have it ready to be built. So we could go out and bid it in phases if we have to. But as came up in discussion tonight, it sounds like everyone was in agreement that constructing the Triangle Trail and pathways is still important in addition to Stanley Park. And so we're going to have to, you know, try to make it work. So we should hear back by late April if we're going to receive the funding. And if we do, we'd receive it in May of this year. So that was just something that I periodically, well, I don't want to say periodically, I do look at grants and what's available and what we can realistically pursue. I mean, we can't pursue every grant, and you know, it's not likely that we'd receive every grant we applied for, but this one seemed like it was a realistic something that we could achieve. I did talk to someone at the Community Foundation, and they seemed to think that this project had merit to it. And so I had a couple of positive conversations with the Community Foundation. You know, a positive conversation doesn't mean you'll get a grant, but it was a very good discussion. So we're still going to pursue the Triangle Trail. We just may not construct it all at once.
I agree with Justin. If we get this grant, you know, for it, I don't think that we should leave money on the table. I think every dollar is going to help fund our projects in the park system one way or another. So, you know, we need to move forward with it in phases if we have to continue on with the parks millage that we promised the residents to keep trails in the area. So I think, you know, whatever we can do, if it's this year, next year, whenever, in phases, just to get it done and to get as much grant money as possible down the road, you know, because every dollar that we save one way, we're going to be able to put it somewhere else. So I think that's great.
This, you know, the Triangle Trail, you know, really you can almost call it like a civic center pathway loop, because it's going to bring all the people on Tegadyne, the hundreds of people that live over there. They could walk or bike to the civic center, because the idea is that when the road commission does the Elizabeth Lake Road improvements at some point, there's going to be pedestrian crossovers from one side of the road to the other. So it's just all about getting people connected, getting the future residents of the civic center out on sidewalks. They could walk or bike to Kroger, walk or bike to the Village Lakes restaurants and shops. So it's all about getting people moving in that 2-mile loop to different services in the township. So we're gonna try to get it done.
Okay, we're crossing our fingers.
Yeah.
Just like we do on all of them. Now the next thing is just communications. It's 9:34. Does anyone have anything else they need to talk about tonight?
Yeah, Marie, I do,
Yes.
but let Andrea go first.
You know, I was just going to reference, I had more, but I'm going to cut it short. I was just going to reference the meeting that Mike Powell talked about earlier. Today I got an email saying that our next meeting, which is February 10th, we're going to have the Township Board and the Parks and Rec meet together on our scheduled night. So it's the same time, it's just they're going to come to our meeting. So that's all I mean, I have more to say, but we're good.
Okay, we as always welcome our township trustees because they're the ones that are actually voted in by the people, so they're in charge. With that,
Marie?
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. And
It's late.
It's very important. I did allude to the fact that I attended the Lakewood Village Subdivision Association meeting Monday night. And it's critical that I share this with the board, with the committee, because obviously those people are very concerned of what the impact of the development of this park might be on their lifestyle and what they're used to. They absolutely, quite frankly, gave me a great deal of respect, and I appreciate them very much. We had a good dialogue back and forth about what their end desire might be and the realistic of where we're going to be maybe representing to the township board. If I can capsulize it all, their biggest issue is how is the impact of that park going to change their life and impact them? So is it going to change the night sky at night? So are we going to have bright lights over there? Is it going to impact how they can use the lake? Certainly that's a concern to them. Are there going to be 150 canoes all over the lake and paddle boats and kayaks and everything else that's going to interfere with their lifestyle? And once we talked about the issues specifically, it really came down to where they were very understanding that whatever happens on this property is a lot better than the 60 condominiums that were proposed at one time. And they totally understand that this is meant to be a park for other than Lakewood Village people. They also understand that the people that front the lake on the west side of the lake have a totally different lifestyle and a totally different opinion of the lake and how to use it than the off-lake people. And they understand that the other people around the township are like the off-lake people and they want to be able to use the lake. They respectfully asked us to keep in mind whatever we do along the lake shore to not allow it as much as possible to impact boating and skiing and tubing and things like that down the center of the lake. If we put in swimming buoys, that we make sure that we know that boats have to stay 150 feet. Actually, boats have to keep the skiers and the tubers 150 feet from those buoys. And so if we push those way out into the lake, that's going to make a major impact on them. They seem to really gravitate towards us keeping our improvements into our little bay, which is really what the intent of our plan is right now.
Yeah.
Utilize the shoreline. We have some existing sand towards the southern end, and they respect the fact that we're not inviting people to swim from here and swim across the lake.
No.
That the intent here is maybe to allow their kids to wade up into their knees and splash around and use their buckets on the shore and things like that. They understand that we're not going to have any boat launches, no motorized boat launches whatsoever. They wondered how we might propose anyway, limiting the the access to the lake from kayakers and canoers. And I represented the fact that most kayaks and canoers want to go around the shoreline. They don't necessarily want to go out and sit in the middle of a bobbing lake, certainly. They respected that. They don't want the dock to go 150 feet out into the water. And I said, no, that's not our intent. We just want the off-lake people to be able to feel what it's like to be out on a dock with some water around them, much like Boomer Park is. And so once they understood the attitude, and I'm hoping that a lot of them have been watching us tonight, and they feel a lot more comfortable that we're not looking to build a major access along the lake shore. And that's kind of that was their really biggest concern. And so they were really appreciative. I appreciated their input to me. They're looking to me to kind of be somewhat of an input, sharing what their concerns are, and vice versa. I'm hoping that they will share with me their input, their impact, and what they felt about what happened at tonight's meeting. But quite frankly, they understood that they are a very loud voice, and if it was their desire, hence Kathleen and Liz talked about it, if it was up to them, this would stay exactly the way it is right now, and nothing would be done to it.
Yep.
And they realize that's not realistic, but they're asking us to just be cognizant of how it might impact their life. And they don't want spotlights shining across the lake, lighting up the shoreline and things like that. So they're just scared, as everyone is with new items. Marie and I deal with even pathways down in parklands behind subdivision lots. The people have the idea that thousands of people are going to be walking past their backyard and be spying on them. And in reality, that doesn't happen. And so I just wanted to represent that they're realistic, but they would very much like to be included. And when it comes to developing that shoreline, they'd like to have a say and at least express themselves. So thank you very much for Marie for giving me the ability to share that. It was very important that I do. And hopefully they get back to me regarding that. So thank you.
Well, thank you for being our ambassador, because I know that situation well. So
yes,
I appreciate you going to the meeting and speaking on our behalf is what we're trying to do for everybody in the township. Anybody else before? Yes, Liz?
You're muted, Liz.
You're muted, yeah.
There we go. I just want to quickly thank everybody. I'm sure this was a little bit longer meeting than you're used to. And so thank you for entertaining our ideas. And I'm so glad that I was able to hear your ideas. And this was a great brainstorming session. And I really appreciate the time that you have all put into this. And it is a collaboration, and it's a collaborative effort. And the process, just as the public goes back and watches this, is it's really important for the Parks and Rec Committee to hammer out these issues now before it comes to the township board. Because if we wait too long and we wait for these issues to be hammered out in front of the township board, we risk meeting our grant deadline. So I just want to thank you for the extra time that you spent tonight. It's well worth it in the overall picture. So, and thank you for so warmly including Trustee Powell and myself. I do appreciate that.
Well, we appreciate all our board members participating, because it helps us to know what will fly upstairs, so to speak. All right, I'm gonna make one last call. Can't see everybody. I don't know if Deb's still here.
She's still there.
Okay. Anybody else want to make any closing remarks? Otherwise, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Motion to adjourn the meeting.
We'll
Casey
support
K?
that.
Was that
Support
Rhonda?
by Andrea, I think.
Oh, Andrea?
Yeah,
Okay.
so-
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And thank you all.
Thank you.
And we'll see you in
Thank
2
you.
weeks.
Thanks,
Good night,
everyone.
everybody.
For some reason, I
Thank
don't have
you.
anything on my calendar ever, so.